Welcome to the with Finance Malta. Today we have Karol Gabarretta, Secretary General of the Malta Bankers Association. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you start by introducing the MBA for the benefit of those listeners who maybe is not familiar with your organization?
Yes, of course. The MBA is basically the association for the licensed banks in Malta. We currently comprise 22 members. Many of them are banks which do their business locally, carry out their business locally. A few of them are banks which have a mixture of both, so there is exposure to local entities. They can take deposits from local depositors also, but they have a mixture of business which is international and local. Then you have the rest of the other members, which are mainly focused on international business and outside the retail domain. So they're very much more focused on the corporate sector. But as I said, it's they do business almost exclusively internationally.
Very good.
The members, although few in number, relatively speaking, but have quite a mix of activities, except of course for those banks, those retail banks, those we can call them high street banks, which everyone is familiar with in Malta.
Great, thank you. And can you outline the most significant developments in Malta's banking sector in the past year, and has digitization been a part of that?
Okay, I think the past year was can be characterized for everybody, I would imagine, as being hopefully a one-off. A one-off in the sense that most of the resources were dedicated to combating the effects of the pandemic, of the COVID-19 pandemic. So whether it's a question of marshalling in the best way resources, whether it's a question of addressing the demands of the public in a different manner, whether it's the question of having demands then from persons which were impacted negatively by the pandemic, and that was part and parcel of many of the work which was undertaken by the as I said, the retail banks, but not only, even the non-core banks, as they are known, did have these demands for moratoria and for assistance to help them out in this what we hope will be a temporary phase. So last year was a bit of an outlier. It's the tip of the bell-shaped curve, where you have events which are very low probability but very high impact, as we all know. So if I had to say, last year would have been a blip, but I think one of the characteristics of last year was this shift, I think, in consumer patterns also. There was quite a significant shift in digital platforms utilized by institutions. And that is a positive thing, because as you probably well know, or whoever is familiar with our local market, we still place significant reliance on traditional payment instruments such as checks and cash. And COVID-19 has served as a catalyst to drive perhaps those people who used to rely on such payment methods to actually shift because they saw advantages. I'd like to think that since banks were much more focused in addressing, as I said before, the multiple issues arising from COVID, rather than being perhaps in a more serene environment and discussing how best to marshal resources to be further innovative, I would like to think that hopefully in a post-COVID environment, there will be an acceleration of the trend we have seen in last year, and which is continuing. And I think that this is it's not a question of nice to have. Our members, banks, have to do it. They are facing competitive pressures from more agile fintechs. They are facing competition among themselves, and obviously in a post-COVID world, until things start to perhaps revert back to what used to be known as normal. That will also entail competition, healthy competition amongst our members. So I don't want to be. I'm normally cautiously optimistic, but I think the post-COVID environment will be an exciting one for our members, in the sense that there is a process of innovation which has started several years ago. Some players are more agile than others. The fact that you are a traditional bank in Malta, which and all our banks are very plain vanilla banks, traditional banks, or at least most of them are. It may not always be, how shall I say, there may not always be the recognition that we may need to change, because what we've been doing has served us well, and why change a winning horse? But I think the realization is there. I think that even the players which rely on traditional methods of financing have seen the light and are diverting resources, or will divert more resources, in order to have this digital environment which will become more comprehensive amongst our members.
Very good, thank you. And banks play a key role as gatekeepers of the local economy. How successfully have the banks in Malta implemented this role, and has the risk management infrastructure been reviewed in this regard?
Yes, that is a very interesting question, and I think banks were always in the forefront of being considered as the gatekeepers. If we go back to the first iteration of prevention of money laundering legislation, way back in 1994, banks were amongst the first type of entities which were considered as subject persons. So the recognition of safeguarding the banks from being accessories to a crime at the end of the day, because prevention money laundering is a crime. Since that time, I think that banks have invested millions and have seen a huge increase in their compliance functions, in their financial crime compliance capabilities. That is all part of the recognition that one cannot tolerate in any way that our institutions will be used other than for legitimate purposes. So I think even if one had to speak to board members of our banks, they would tell you, and perhaps some of them who had experienced the realities over a longer time period, say over a 10-year span, I'm sure they would tell you that the amount of time that boards have been dedicating to compliance issues, to risk management issues, to reputational issues is much more than it used to be. And this is not a knee-jerk reaction to Manival, far from it. The process, as I said, started way before that. We have to keep in mind that, unfortunately, although we have had cases of institutions which proved to be less than integral, the majority of players, the absolute majority of players, are legitimate setups. They are there to service the economy and their customers. They're there to obviously make a profit also for their shareholders. And it is in the collective interest that they do not in any way serve as a channel for dirty money. And that is the absolute reality for all our members. So I think that the process has accelerated over the last 5 years. If you look also at what the Manival report said on the banking sector, I don't think the banking sector was considered to be one of the, or rather, let me put it the other way. I think the banking sector was considered to be one of those areas where at least there was not huge problems. It's not as if to say that Manival did not require and recommend changes, and changes are being undertaken. The interaction also with our regulatory authorities has, over the last couple of years, increased, evidently because of the Manival effect, but also because it needed to be done, and it's good for everyone. It's good for the reputation of the jurisdiction. It's good for the institutions, because at the end of the day they have to plug any lacune which they have, and also at the end of the day, as I said, reinforces the principle that our institutions will never ever serve as a channel for dirty money. Okay. It's not as if there aren't holes to be plugged, there are. Mm-hmm. But I think the holes are not gaping holes which will sink a ship, but holes which require maintenance. If you don't maintain those holes, if you don't look after and take care to plug those holes, mm-hmm. they could prove to be dangerous for sailing. Mm-hmm. So it's important. And I think everyone is very much appreciative. Today it's not so much of an us and them mm-hmm. mentality. There is scope for interaction. Mm-hmm. There is scope for public-private partnerships, and we hope that in Malta also this will continue to be a characteristic as it is in other countries. We have already some instances, and we look forward as the banking sector itself to have additional partnerships which will continue to whittle down the possibility of serving as a channel for money laundering. You will never ever be able to be 100% sure that you've plugged all the holes, or that there may not be attempts to channel dirty money through you. But at least you are well prepared and armored to defend yourself.
Very good. And yes, best endeavours and the industry pulling the same rope is
Exactly.
key to progress. And in keeping with talking about security, cybersecurity is now a major concern across all financial services. How has the Malta banking sector been tackling this?
Cybersecurity, again, in much the same way as perhaps events which we said are very low probability but high impact, then when they actually occur, everyone starts to take the necessary action to shore up and to address the impact of such events. In Malta, as you know, a bit less than 2 years ago, we had a major incident in one of our banks. And I think that sent signals. Again, it's not that banks were not prepared. You can always prepare. You can always try to do the best. But you are going to find someone somewhere who's going to find a chink in your armor. And that chink you may have thought was not going to damage you. But I think that event which we had locally and other events and the recognition that cybersecurity incidents have an impact not only on the financial perspective, they have an impact on your reputation. And they have an impact on your customers. Is my money safe? It is in everyone's interest on the part of our members to shore up their defenses, to do what needs to be done in addressing. The process is a never-ending one. The amount of resources that banks have to dedicate is also significant. You have training of personnel. You need to change systems. You need to adopt more robust risk management policies and procedures. So it's a very big task. And I think our members, as I said, have been undertaking this task, but again, when you have incidents, they serve to focus attention and more. And we at the MBA also have try to facilitate matters by bringing members together to share best practices, to discuss without obviously going into the details, the specific details of their institution, because that's a no-go area for the MBA. But we have a forum which is a forum for bringing ideas and to discuss, as I said, ways on how best to counter the ever present and ever-growing, unfortunately, threat. So again, this is another area where you say, okay, we've arrived. No, you never arrive. Because when you arrive, then you see other avenues which need to be explored in order to maintain a healthy risk environment.
Indeed. And what would you say is the outlook for Maltese banks? What are the primary changes the industry can expect in terms of the competitive landscape, regulation, its relationship with the funds industry, etc.?
Okay, I think my main so to say point or focus would be to address the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is Malta's reputation. I think that is the biggest challenge. The impact, the negative impact which everyone felt because of the deterioration in our reputation over the last few years had a very tangible impact also on our members. And mainly in the area of correspondent banking in US dollar, but not only. So it's already a big problem for a small island state, even if its reputation is squeaky clean, to find correspondent banking relationships with the big players. Why? Because correspondent banks themselves have retrenched. And this is a phenomenon which affected not only Malta, but many other jurisdictions. And this has been happening for the last at least 10 years. And it's a very simple relationship. It's a very simple issue, which is caused by the risk-reward relationship. So, volumes in small countries are very low, but risks sometimes are not. So there is the recognition on the part of the correspondent banks to say, okay, we are gaining X million dollars from country whoever. Is it worth it? Is it worth because we're seeing a deterioration in that country's reputation. We're seeing their institutions which are dealing in a number of sectors, business sectors, we are not comfortable with. So, bottom line is, what do? They just cut relationships. They don't need us. We need them. So, this has occurred as a process, as I said. And it was accelerated with the deterioration in Malta's reputation. So the biggest challenge we have today is for banks to operate when you have this cloud over your head. And to add to this, we have the another sword of Damocles hanging over our heads. We have the FATF assessment, which obviously now formalizes the Manival process in June. In June, there will be a plenary meeting, and there it will be decided whether Malta will be grey-listed or not. If Malta is not grey-listed, and I sincerely hope that I think everyone sincerely hopes that we do make the grade, then that could perhaps lift some of the cloud. But, again, have we arrived? No. We have just started on another journey. And the banking sector has to continue to show that notwithstanding it will, that the jurisdiction has passed the test, that it has to show that they will continue to operate in the best way possible, in order to remove any hint of bad reputation which may still linger in the air, so to say. And I see that in hopefully a post-COVID environment, in a situation whereby Malta will hopefully not be grey listed, I see that as, again, perhaps I'm being a bit too emphatic, but it is a bit of an exciting time. Even though our banks are not, as I said, in the forefront of operating with a huge number of innovative instruments, which, as an aside, was one of the reasons why in 2008, when there was the financial crisis, our banks sailed through without any problems whatsoever. There was no government intervention whatsoever. Why? Because small was beautiful at that time and plain vanilla was the flavor of the day. Today things are different. Today there are much more complex issues in interacting. But I think that by and large, for our sector, in the conditions I mentioned before, I see this as being a fruitful time, or could possibly be a fruitful time. And with perhaps the renewed interest in Malta as a jurisdiction, hopefully as a result of a positive assessment by the FATF, that could also see more foreign direct investment, which would be channeled here, and also certain investment possibilities which could have been put on hold because of these two major impacts, COVID and the possibility of grey listing. Then there would be much more comfort in going forward to undertake investment. As an aside, the banking sector here is, notwithstanding that we have a capital market, and we also have small alternative markets, the banking sector still is the main driver of the economy here. And this is, again, it's not an outlier. Malta is not an outlier here. It's characteristic of many European countries, where and that is the reason why there is this drive, which doesn't seem to be driving at a fast pace, on the implementation of a capital markets union within Europe. But the banking sector here is still the main driver. So it's important. It's in a way, there is this symbiotic relationship between the economy and banks. Banks make the economy run. At the same time, banks are also generating new opportunities for their customers to have better service and hopefully a better coverage, even in the products that are offered. When it comes to how shall I say, the faith or the confidence in the banking sector, I think by and large, thankfully, that is still very, very marked here in Malta. Deposits continue to be generated, notwithstanding the, as we all know, abysmal interest rates which our members, but not only our members, banks all over have to pay all over the world because of the current interest rate environment. Yet deposits flow in. So from a funding perspective, banks continue local banks continue to be funded by deposits, again, to a significant extent when you look also with other European peers. And that is also a positive. So by and large, I am, I said it before, cautiously optimistic that things will improve.
Very good. Thank you, Karol, for talking us through the journey that Maltese banks are expected to take. The FinTalks are available on the main podcast apps and on the Finance Malta YouTube channel. For more information, please visit www.financemalta.org/podcast and follow Finance Malta on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you.